Welcome to this episode of The World According to Irina Tsukerman, our very special series on global politics on the KAJ Masterclass Live. Irina Tsukerman is a US based national security and human rights lawyer as well as a renowned geopolitical analyst. Her writings and commentary have appeared in diverse US and international media and have been translated to over a dozen languages. Every fortnight, in the world, according to Irina Tsukerman, we traverse the geopolitical landscape and delve into pressing international issues and gain insight from Irina's expert perspective. Welcome to the show once again, Irina.
Always glad to be here.
Welcome once again. Several big topics today. So we'll be coming to that. But first, the latest development Israeli strikes on Syria. Why?
Uh, so, this is not a new issue. Israel and the Syrian military have clashed in the recent past. Basically, Israel's policy is to not have any Syrian soldiers in the south of the country, which Israel is trying to treat like a buffer zone before its borders. The latest developments is that there were clashes reported between local Syrian Bedouin, assorted foreign fighters, elements of the Syrian army, and Druze. The Druze came to believe that there was a planned massacre by the by this contingency, and there was also there were also people killed in the clashes, including many Jews. One of them was a community leader who appeared to be tortured before he was killed. The Jews located in Suwaida, uh, part of the Syria that close to the border with Israel, have in the past uh, did live through horrific massacres by elements of HTS, which was recently removed from the sanctions list by the US and which was incorporated into the Syrian unity government by and large, but not all of it. It's still not clear to what extent Jolani directed this issue or ignored it or simply couldn't control it. Many believe that he ideologically aligned with these attacks, um, and was using them as proxies in many ways to try to oppress the local minorities such as the Jews. The issue is complicated by the fact that the Druze also live on the other side of the Golan Heights in Israel, and in Golan Heights, the annexed territories that are uh, that Israel considers its territory, but that's not universally recognized, and Syria has demanded back. Israel and Syria were in the middle of peace talks when this incident happened. Israel wanted to send a strong message to stop these attacks on the Druze, uh, and some of its own population actually crossed the border to assist their brethren. That they struck two government buildings. Some of the ministers actually called for the assassination of Al Jilani. Israel has expressed repeated distrust of the former HTS leader because of his affiliations with various terrorist organizations. But increasingly, Al Shara has been gaining international political legitimacy and just recently concluded a visit to Baku, where the local oil company concluded an agreement with Syria for an oil deal. He also had a series of meetings with the Israeli with the Israeli national security personnel in Abu Dhabi because the countries have been discussing potential for peace or security agreements of some sort. Whether it was ever going to be a full normalization is doubtful, but they wanted to come to some sort of an arrangement. All of this has resulted in a ceasefire deal between the Jews and the government, and there was a statement issued by Syria, basically saying that they reserved the right to retaliate because Israel had no right to attack their territory. And of course, the question of any diplomatic negotiations is now very much up in the air. Also, many questions are raised about the U.S. policy and EU policy, the quick removal of international sanctions, um, not only from the Syrian government itself, but also from the terrorist organizations such as HTS, because there was never a point where they completely stopped clashes with the local populations. And not all elements of HTS were fully incorporated in the government in the first place, complicating the scenario. So, while it's unclear whether Zelani had intentionally supported this massacre or not, it is clear that at the very least he has not been able to gain security control of his own forces or of assorted militias operating in Syria. And this is an issue that's been brought up repeatedly in both inside Syria and externally, and yet there has not been a very clear framework proposed by any international entity that would assist in securitizing the local situation or create any sort of conditioning of aid or of sanctions relief or any sort of business deals on creating a structure that would put an end to this chaos. Now, many in Israel have described all of this as massacres, genocides. I don't have evidence that there was any genocidal intent, but it's very clear that there are elements that are ideologically uh, mm, intolerant, extremist, possibly even still jihadist affiliated, who had ill intent and who clearly um, resorted to deadly violence in pursuit of their accumulation of local power. And that it's also clear that Al Sharaa cannot divest himself entirely of these structures. So all of that remains a very concerning issue. Whether what Israel did was completely correct under the circumstances or will backfire politically remains to be seen. Obviously, you cannot pursue diplomacy while at the same time attacking the country, even if Syria currently does not have the power to respond in kind. It may it may cause complications later. It's also many questions that Israel has immediately resorted to that to use of force instead of trying to put behind the scenes pressure on the government by using it as a negotiation tool. In other words, during their own peace talks. In other words, if you want to have any sort of dealings with us, this is what you have to do. Otherwise, the negotiations are off. So there's been a lot of criticism. The Arab governments have been pretty much restrained, um, and but on the other hand, there's been a lot of criticism from non-government sources, assorted activists online, and so forth. I believe that for the time being, the issue has been settled. I don't think there'll be an escalation. The U.S. has been putting pressure to put an end to the violence, and it has also pressured Israel to abstain from any further attacks. So this seems to be, for the time, it. But I don't think it resolves any of the issues internally, especially given the role of the U.S. Special Envoy for Syria, and who is also the ambassador to Turkey and a close Trump associate, Tam Barak, who's had close relations with Qatar and Turkey, some of the main Syrian government patrons, and who also just recently recognized Hezbollah in Lebanon as a political entity rather than as a terrorist organization, contradicting official U.S. policy. And he also said that Syrian government should be completely centralized and denied the right to autonomy to its minorities. Even as Turkey is trying to make a peace deal with the former PKK, and there's a discussion whether the mixed Arab and Kurdish SDF forces should be integrated into the Syrian military. These incidents and clashes of violence against the Druze legally and politically complicate this issue of integration as well, because if SDF integrates into the military, not only it raises questions about U.S. support for them. U.S. does not yet officially recognize the Syrian government or its military, but it raises questions about their own culpability if the Syrian or even elements of the Syrian military engage in human rights abuses or violence. So a lot of issues are now up in the air because of what happened.
Absolutely, absolutely, Irina. One thing I want to understand for the audience is that, recently Netanyahu Trump had a meeting, and at that point in time, there was also this whole Syria peace process, the thing, Israel Syria peace process thing happening in Abu Dhabi. That talk was there. Couldn't it have waited till some time? And now it's a new Syria. Means the US is very much, part of this whole talk going on everywhere, especially bringing some peace to Syria. Amidst
Well,
all these things, a outside world will think, why was the and everybody seems to be on the same side, but still there are these attacks.
Well, here's the thing. Nobody knows whose side Al Sharaa is really on because he's trying to play all sides. He needs Turkish support because they brought him to power. He needs Saudi support because they've got the money. He needs Qatari support because ideologically Qataris are invested and they have a kinship with him ideologically. He needs Israel because he doesn't want to be overly dependent on Turkey, which has its own expansionist plans into Syria, and also because he does not want a war with Israel because he does not have, because the country is very fragmented. He wants U.S. support for obvious reasons and European support again for financial reasons and reasons of financial relief. But a lot of people don't trust him. They don't trust him because he's a very chameleon-like character who, at one point, was himself involved in terrorist organizations. He was a prisoner in a U.S. Detention camp in Iraq. He then forged ties with assorted networks, jihadist networks, and uh, eventually became a part of a Turkey-backed opposition movement that helped displace, played a leading role, I would say, in ousting Assad and then claiming legitimacy. It was not a democratic process. He proclaimed himself the president after basically taking power by force. Um, he claimed that this is a transitional government and that in 4 years they will have an elections, but who's to say that that's really the case? This is someone who's been himself responsible for human rights abuses, including at least two attacks related to the Jews, not to mention various other groups of people. This is, and he's been on an FBI wanted list for a decade before being finally removed because he he managed to convince everybody that he is dedicated to peace and inclusivity and putting down the arms. He's trying to portray himself as Sinn Féin, the Irish political party that rose from IRA. But we are seeing that so far that message has not reached everybody of his own support networks, and the more time passes and the less he's able to put an end to these massive incidents, the more there is distrust for him international, and it puts donors and investors into Syria, even those who backed him from the beginning, like Saudis and Turkey, into a very awkward position of having to explain why they continue to support this character and not make explicit demands to create a process that would um, create a very structured and integrated military and get rid of some of these fighters. Moreover, what's even worse is that the U.S. apparently played a role in approving the foreign fighters, some of whom don't speak a word of Arabic, who are now part of this situation. One of them was captured by the Jews, and he was a Chechen who spoke only Russian and Chechen and no Arabic, and he was clearly one of those foreign fighters who came to Syria to fight, and not because he has any dedication to the national goals of the country, but because he was a mercenary and wanted to make a buck doing what he does best. So all of this is raising a lot of questions about the legitimacy of the current government and whether it will continue receiving international support or whether it will end up like so many other failed states following the same model. We've seen this happen in Lebanon, in Syria, we've seen the fragmentation of the state in Yemen, and could Syria be next? Very possible if the policy doesn't change and there isn't a clear process to hold groups responsible for violence accountable.
Absolutely, absolutely complicated world of world politics out there in the Middle East. Let's make sense of it a bit more. What happened during the Trump Netanyahu meeting, and especially about Iran? Means Iran is still making noises. I read today that don't attack again or we will attack you. Something like this. It's like a child saying, somebody, uh, hits them, and then they say, "Don't hit me again, or I will hit you back." Help us understand about this Trump Netanyahu meeting and what's happening in the Iran, Israel crisis.
Well, the meeting was not highly publicized because it was more about reassessing the situation after the recent strikes and figuring out how to move forward than about any particular announcements or big wins. I think Trump very much is concerned about the nuclear issue. I think there was a discussion under what circumstances Israel could be greenlit to attack again. I think one of those conditions is if Iran rejects nuclear deal. We've seen the policy changes, although by several European countries who are going to engage in sanctions snapback by August if there is no deal by that time, which means fairly serious financial consequences um, for Iran. Let's recall that those European countries did not withdraw from JCPOA. From their perspective, it's still in force, and they can return to the sanctions regime from at a moment's notice. And uh, the time when those some of those sunset clauses are expiring is basically this year, so they have a limited window of opportunity to kind of uh, to return to sanctions before they have no further ability to before it becomes a permanent framework from their perspective. US, of course, withdrew in 2018. Iran is testing waters. He understands that since US and Israel did not put an end to the leadership and did not fully dismantle its military and did not completely put an end to its nuclear program, there is some hesitation, and they're trying to figure out just how much they can get away with without a more serious operation. And what was supposed to happen this week? There were supposed to be negotiations in Norway with Iran, but we are seeing that the all of that seems to be up in the air. There's no clear progress, and there's no clear direction as to where all of this is going, and what exactly how US can even enforce its demand for an end to the nuclear program, given that a lot of the uranium was smuggled out of the facility before the strikes to an unknown location that's almost impossible to reach, and given the fact that after the strikes, Iran kicked out the inspectors and is refusing to bring them back. That does not signal its willingness to return to the negotiation table, even after the show of force by US and Israel. I think there's a lot of confusion, and the conversation between Trump and Netanyahu did not ultimately conclude in an agreement. They are not on the same page. Israel wants clear indications that the nuclear program is finished, and they also want any deal or any discussion or policy on Iran to include enforcements against its terrorist entities and its ballistic missile program this time around. Trump is still dedicated to diplomacy and is still trying to give peace a chance, as he basically claims. But I don't really see much success so far.
Absolutely, absolutely. The world is trying to understand Trump's domestic policy, also as well as his foreign policy. In domestic policy, you can see Jeffrey Epstein's his list is making a lot of news. And while that makes news, Trump is talking about again releasing Imran Khan in Pakistan prison. Uh, what's happening there? Means what does uh, Donald Trump want?
Well, in terms of Epstein, I believe this idea of Epstein's list was used by Trump because while he was out of office, because he believed it would hurt the Democrats. Of course, as we are now quite aware, Epstein's associates included bipartisan, high profile figures, including Trump himself. His role is less suspicious and more open because he was an FBI informant. He had a falling out with Epstein over a real estate deal, and he basically ratted him out to the FBI before Epstein could do something to him. It's very clear that Epstein was engaged in some form of sex trafficking. Ghislaine Maxwell went away for 20 years for a reason. It's very clear that there were a lot of high profile clients involved in all of them. It's clear that at least some of the women were underage and clearly they had clients. Who those clients were, we can guess. We don't know which of the known public figures were engaged with underage women and who were there just for the drinking and the networking, but it's safe to presume that at least some of them benefited from this Lolita Express that Epstein was running, and it's entirely possible that Epstein was basically blackmailing some of them through association alone and bad publicity alone. I don't think Epstein would have had just a simple list of names. I think that's silly. I think I think there was probably documentation of various appearances, public and not so public. I'm sure he had a lot of information about a lot of people, not always just having to do with his sex capades, but also other matters he learned as a matter of being in the circles of important people. It's quite possible that he shared or sold some of that intelligence to various intelligence agencies around the world. He is known to have close associations with Russia, as by the way does the Maxwell family. He is known to have made trips to the Middle East, and Israel is not the only country. We're talking also about Saudi Arabia and several, and potentially some others. Um, so he was very much a shady character. Nobody knows where his wealth came from, and the speculation is that originally he amassed it by latching on to these high rollers and essentially blackmailing them over assorted secrets and potentially entrapping them with these parties. Who knows? What is clear is that I don't think there was ever a simple list to release. I think there was assorted bits of information and stories about assorted people in photographs, in associations, in meetings that the government probably has a fairly good idea too, and because it is potentially embarrassing for a lot of people and could also entail legal culpability for Trump associates, they are choosing to treat it as a conspiracy theory all of a sudden. And Trump is even discrediting his own supporters after leading this whole movement demanding that list. I mean, it's completely hypocritical. I think this is obviously silly. I think both sides are being ridiculous. This is kind of like the argument about whether or not Epstein hanged himself. What's very obvious is, I think what's important is not whether he put the rope around his neck, but more important is who gave him that rope in a closed prison, who edited the tape of his alleged suicide, and why, and who benefited from him not being able to testify. I think those are legitimate questions, and the problem is it was treated in a very silly, conspiratorial way, not the way a serious investigation should ever have been conducted. It became exceptionally politicized. It became a hot potato issue for both parties, and now a lot of powerful people who abuse their power in various ways are going to get away with all of it simply because they can, and simply because the issue has become so widely discredited and so ridiculous that it's almost impossible to treat it in a way that's just, that would bring people tra- to justice in a transparent and accountable way, and could seriously damage a lot of reputations at the very least.
Absolutely. And what about Imran Khan? Now he's talking about
Mhm.
the release of Imran Khan in Pakistan, and recently he just hosted the general at the White House. What does Trump want out of, what's the politics here? What should we understand?
I'll be the last person to defend Pakistani legal policies or judiciary policies. I think, quite frankly, they're highly questionable, and it is very likely that many of the political opponents of any particular given factions are treated in a way that's politicized and unfair. It's also true that Imran Khan was involved in a lot of corruption, as has every leader before him and every leader that followed after him. That So this is not really about the corruption. It's about protecting the ruling interest from a populist and popular leader who was also um, quite suspect by many countries. Saudi Arabia, the West, uh, did not particularly care for him. Why? So why is Trump interfering into another country's policy, albeit deeply flawed in many ways and perhaps undemocratic? Is it really about the rule of law and democracy? Does that really affect U.S. interests so much? Is it a priority for Washington? Absolutely not. I think what's really going on here is that Trump sees some kinship to Imran Khan because he's a populist, and because he sees him as a sort of business leader who was an anti-establishment figure who broke through the elites, and who also had dealings with Russia and China in a way that he embraced openly. Pakistan's obviously been dependent on China for a long time, but Imran Khan did not shy away from it. He actually um, embraced it rather than try to find a way out of it. And this is something that many people really resented, but Trump, who is trying to position himself as a deal maker with all these authoritarian regimes, probably saw some sort of similarities, as he does with many of such figures. And I think this is the real reason why he is taking a rather extraordinary step of interfering in a judicial process over a political issue in another country that, to be honest, is not particularly important to the U.S. in the grand scheme of things.
Absolutely, absolutely. We have to watch out what happens there, whether the establishment listens to Donald Trump or not. That politics we'll have to understand. But let's move on to Ukraine. And Trump has pledged to restore defensive aid to Ukraine. And in the meantime, Russia has increased its attack on civilians in Ukraine. Help us understand about how do you see this? When will it happen? Where does this war on Ukraine Russia stand as of today? I thought it was getting to be resolved in 24 hours of Trump getting into office this time.
Well, I'll be honest with you, I don't see anything changing much as a result of this, other than hopefully Ukraine is getting at least some ability to protect their civilians from harm in the cities. I think this issue has been somewhat exaggerated by the people who want to see a change in policy, for good reason, by the way. And essentially, the way it played out is that the defensive aid that Ukraine finally was getting after the Trump Zelensky tussle at the White House, and uh, after the signing of the mineral deal, was paused allegedly, or as Trump says, without his knowledge, by a Pentagon official, Eldridge Colby, the grandson of the former CIA director, who is known as not only an isolationist but someone who does not particularly get along with others all that well. Colby seems to have lied in a letter he issued recommending the end to this to the delivery of the Patriot missiles, which had first of all which are outdated and which have already been approved by Congress and stored in Poland. He claimed that sharing those Patriot missiles would deplete the US arsenal. The reality is it's not the Patriot batteries that are a problem to the US, it's the interceptors. And if US doesn't have enough interceptors in general, they wouldn't be going to Ukraine anyway, simply because they're physically not there to be given. So all of that was, let's just say, very much a hijacking of the official policy, if true. Now, it's entirely possible that Colby did all of that just to please Trump as a wink, wink, nudge, nudge, and Trump overlooked it until they got caught and it became a scandal. Um, so Trump had no choice but to resume it, especially given the fact that he was getting embarrassed by the numbers of civilians being killed. The Melania Trump episode, where he had yet another conversation with Putin, who was stringing him along with the niceties and then immediately using these conversations as a green light to attack civilians and renew the drone attacks and the missile attacks and so forth. So, bad optics. Things are not looking good for Trump as a peacemaker. Not only is this deal not working out, but things in Gaza and with Iran are not moving towards a conclusion. So he probably felt pressure to do something that to reestablish credibility and put a tiny little bit of pressure. Now, very quickly, he started moving away and conditioning even the little that was given. I mean, it was substantial in terms of finances, and Trump did say that European countries could now buy these assorted approved equipment and either sell or give them to Ukraine, which is all fine. The problem is that uh, Trump now claimed that he would allow Ukraine to attack Russia but not Moscow. He is still protecting the political elites there. He is still trying to pretend like that sort of escalation would somehow bring about World War III or nuclear war, uh, which has been disproven and discredited over time. He's still saying that he is neutral on the issue, so he's not openly supporting Ukraine's moral or physical victory, even as Russia is suffering exceptional heavy losses. He threatened but did not impose tariffs. He gave Russia a 50-day window of opportunity to do as much damage as it wants in the meantime. He mentioned the possibility of secondary sanctions, but then walked that back and is not mentioning that anymore. So that means that countries that do business with Russia may not be penalized even after this threat, and Russia can continue doing business with third parties and sustaining its war economy. All of these things make his position far less far less of a triumph for those who were hoping for a very serious 180 than what it appears in the first place. There is some positive things for Ukraine in there, but has Trump really switched his positions, or is he trying to simply appease some of his critics and also, uh, while also giving Putin some leeway in avoiding a confrontation? That appears to be much more of the case from his own comments and from the policies as they are.
Absolutely. And what about North Korea assisting Russia? That has grown up. Its soldiers were earlier on there. Many of them, died in that assistance. And so, what is? How should we understand this? What does North Korea want with more assistance there? And I haven't heard U.S. talking about this whole sort of uh, collaboration between Russia and North Korea. Why is U.S. silent on this?
It has been mentioned in the media, but politically it has been greatly underplayed. There's a couple of reasons for that. First, many people are simply embarrassed of being wrong about all of this. When Putin and Kim had their infamous meetings, people believed that that collaboration would not go past some very minor exchanges. That turned out to be not the case. Not only has Russia collapsed faster than anyone expected, but North Korea put up much more than anyone was planning to see. Now, approximately 40% of Russia's equipment is coming from North Korea. That's a lot. That is an indication of Russia's weakness on the one hand, but also a growing internationalization of this issue and North Korea's rise on the global stage at the same time. At the time it was happening, many people denied, and if you remember, I was one of the few people who claimed that this was going to go much farther, and as it did. So embarrassment by the experts who were proven wrong and who are still trying to underplay this issue is one. But the second issue is political. Trump has has tried in the past to make peace with North Korea by offering them uh, a business deal and investments into real estate, which was rejected by Kim. But for Kim, it was the meeting with Trump was a huge victory. Trump is still not ruling out some sort of normalization with North Korea, some sort of diplomatic breakthrough, and we've heard some noise recently. That could be the reason why he does not want to highlight North Korea's growing role in this fiasco, and the fact that North Korea is supplying Russia successfully with weapons, and none of that exchange is being disrupted in any meaningful way. Yeah, this is a policy failure by the international community, of course, but it's also a sign that U.S. does not wish to highlight North Korea's role in this war, and the fact that it's actually creating a whole international front. Mm, the World War III that everybody was warning about, it's actually Russia, North Korea, Iran, and China that are creating it by coming together to supply an illegitimate war with assorted forms of assistance. We've seen a recent statement by China that they will not allow Russia to lose that war. So that's yet another sign of this axis now formally acknowledging that cooperation and even forgetting about the possibility of US sanctions and so forth. They feel emboldened by the US policy and lack of commitment. So, what does that mean for everybody else? Not good. We are seeing that Japan and South Korea are looking to mend to mend relations with China. It's not only about China's threat or the fact that they don't trust the US to do the right thing. It's also about North Korea and the fact that with North Korea becoming as emboldened as it is, uh, there is a strong possibility that should North Korea, in its unpredictable manner, stage an actual attack, US would not get involved. And I think this is an angle that nobody likes to mention because everybody kind of likes to forget about Kim and just discount him as a lunatic, but he's a very calculating fellow, which is why he's where he is now. Mm, and I think even China is a bit concerned about him getting out of hand and getting a little bit too much independence. And I, I don't think China has as much control over the situation as people would like to credit it with either.
Absolutely. And I'm intrigued exactly as to what does North Korea want, its leadership want, from all these things. What do they get out of helping Russia here?
For them, it's two things: greater independence from China, and two, great international presence and legitimacy. And indeed, it may be surprising, but Russia has gotten North Korea an opening with assorted proxies and regimes. Nicaragua being one of them, the Taliban being another. Now, we might say this is not something to boast about, really. Who wants those regimes, to be considered as allies? But for North Korea, it's still better than nothing. It's still a potential for trade, for boasting of some form of legitimacy, and it's an opening to deals, business, and to potentially other countries. We are seeing, however, that even European countries are have reconnecting diplomatically on some level. It may not be full; they may be well short of full normalization, but we are seeing that there are conversations being had, which is more than what North Korea had a decade ago, and for them, every step is a huge win. So they are actually literally improving their standing in the world, which is what any country or regime wants to see.
Absolutely. And talking of Russia, we hearing about the Saudi Arabia's reapproachment with Russia. What does it mean? Means is Saudi Arabia now moving back towards Russia? Will US lose this key Middle Eastern ally?
We are seeing a lot of things that don't seem to make sense. It's not the Russian weapons that the Saudi want clearly, because they are by far subpar to US or French weapons that the Saudis can easily procure and have procured in vast quantities. Uh, um, so a lot of it is about energy deals, and now increasingly minerals deals. We have seen recent meetings with the minerals ministry. It's not only about buying Russia's minerals at a potential discount prices, but also about getting assistance with getting Saudi minerals to the international markets. While the ministry has boasted about tons of rare earths and other things that Saudi have, for various reasons, this has not been a clear process for them, and they're seeing Russia as a potential collaborator in that regard. There's also an issue of politics. While Russia is not a militarily strong country, politically it has grown its influence around the world, in Europe, in Africa, in Latin America, in some of the Asian countries. So essentially, Saudis are viewing them as a politically viable actor, and they're seeing it as a calculus to open their own doors to business, to political influence, to collaborations, and to entry into new markets, or a strengthening of their presence, and a potential challenge to the U.S. power, not just through BRICS, but through Shanghai Cooperation Organization, through independent initiatives, through the boosting of tin pot dictators in assorted countries. Yes, we may say that Russia is unfairly meddling in those processes, but from the Saudi perspective, it's the outcome that counts, and whoever ends up in political power in those countries are the people they have to deal with. And if they are pro-Russia, then strengthening relations with Russia makes sense. It's also the case that there are members, particularly of oligarch factions, but also assorted opportunists and of various backgrounds, who simply have personal investments in Russia. It's easy for them to do deals with oligarchs, much easier than having to go through transparent processes of approval with Western countries. So they could get various deals done without oversight and without even necessarily having to deal with their own government structure. So they're using this relationship with Russia for self enrichment without necessarily considering whether it's good for the national interests of Saudi Arabia or whether it can come back to bite them.
Absolutely, absolutely. And from that part of the world to my part of the world, Prime Minister Narendra Modi's, visit to various nations. How do you look all this part of foreign policy, diplomacy, the outcomes out of this? And reports are also coming now. He may visit, China maybe next month for the SEO summit. I don't know whether it will happen or it will not, but if that happens, how do you see that?
So recently, Prime Minister Modi, for those who are not aware, has visited 5 nations. And it was very much a calculated strategic outreach to strengthen India's role in the global south, particularly, while also preparing for various key global summits and increasing his international presence. So These countries, which were Ghana, Trinidad and Tobago, Argentina, Brazil, and Namibia, were very clear pivots from the traditional Euro-American diplomacy. Um, these regions are central to India's trade, energy, and geopolitical interests, and it gives those countries an opportunity to interact with a new player. So it wasn't simply a ceremonial tour; it was very much a diplomatic, meaningful tour. It was aimed at building India-centric networks of cooperation, especially in areas where Western presence is limited and where Chinese influence is rising. They were very carefully choreographed to maximize both symbolic and strategic impact. In each country, the prime minister used bilateral relations to broaden cultural outreach, economic agreements, as well as public diplomacy. There were several firsts during these visits, basically as first Indian prime ministerial visit in decades, and they were used to reframe India as a reliable long-term partner. So this also was to elevate not just Prime Minister Modi's personal visibility, but also to give visibility to India as a rising power, a global power that previously focused on its internal growth and regional developments, but now is increasingly becoming internationally aligned and uh, engaging in assorted trade and influence around the world. There's been a use of emotional sort of resonance of cultural events, especially some of these countries also have large Indian origin populations, and that's a way for India to reinforce soft power while also engaging in political messaging to domestic and to international audiences. There's been a lot of parliament addresses, state honors, and also diaspora engagement, which positioned Modi not only as a national leader of a big and growing country, but also as a transnational figure who is looking to be a leader and a representative of the global South. And one of the most consequential outcomes of this tour was the promotion of India's digital infrastructure model abroad. So India introduced the unified payments interface to Namibia, and one of the things that many people don't know about that system is that it's essentially independent of the US-backed SWIFT financial system. So India is now pushing very much not only a digital economic approach, but also an independent financial system in a way, which may be appealing to countries like Namibia, developing countries in Africa, expediting and automating a lot of the exchange processes, making it easier for local populations to send remittances, for instance, or engage in local trade. It also initiated similar discussions in various other places, and it's now taking digital diplomacy to a new level. It's exporting a successful domestic platform rather than engaging in infrastructure loans like China or defense packages like the United States and Russia. India is trying to use its own strengths um, rather than trying to copy what everybody else is doing, and to become a leader in scalable, low-cost governance solutions that speak to the interests and capabilities of developing countries. And you know, it's a great alternative to debt-heavy models promoted by other global powers. It could give India greater long-term leverage, especially financial and administrative integration with these partner states continue to deepen over time. So, for instance, the BRICS summit in Brazil, which was part of the broader tour, provided a high visibility venue um, to advance India's priorities, which include global governance reform, AI regulation, and counterterrorism coordination. Modi was using that opportunity to push for greater institutional representation for developing countries and to also bring India's regional concern to the forefront of the global security agenda, using that forum and framing these issues within a broader narrative: fairness, multipolarity, reinforcing its claim to leadership among emerging powers, but also ensuring that its national security interests are embedded within multilateral frameworks. And of course, trade and investment agreements were being signed throughout the tour, covering areas ranging from agriculture, renewable energy, rare earth minerals, especially in Namibia, to of course defense technology and education, and which all of this reflects India's evolving strategy of modular engagement, offering specialized technical expertise, capacity building programs, and also targeted economic cooperation rather than blanket strategic alignments, which China and US have been doing. And this model is much more adaptable, less threatening to countries that don't want to be tied to great power entanglements. And so, by focusing on shared development goals rather than ideology or military pacts, Modi is positioning India as a neutral but capable force for regional stability. Now, some people have criticized all of this as, distracting from pressing domestic issues such as governance, economic disparity, internal security, and so forth. Um, so people are asking how sustainable are these major engagements if they are not matched by internal cohesion and performance. If India succeeds at boosting its image abroad, but you know can't deliver on domestic promises or promises with these new partnerships, then can not this really high profile strategy backfire? Of course, all of that remains to be seen. The real test is going to be execution, whether anything will comes from these MOUs and agreements and announcements, or whether it's going to be very much like with some places where you sign a lot of agreements and then nothing ever happens. And unfortunately, yes, has also been sometimes guilty of that, especially on the climate change agenda and so forth.
Absolutely, absolutely. A lot to understand about internationally, but yes, nations have to keep on, connecting with the world, and also leaders, pragmatic leaders, continue to connect with their own local domestic issues as well as audience. So let's move on to another issue uh, that happened recently: the Air India, disaster investigation. How do you see the progress there? Lots of news, lots of conspiracies, lots of different reporting happening on this. How do you see this whole investigation moving from that part of the world, Ivan?
So the recent announcement was that supposedly one of the issues was that the critical um, cutoff that happened from it. Uh, Essentially, they believed that the pilots may have been the factor that um, they either committed a grave error that made it impossible to salvage the situation, or one of the pilots who recently lost his mother was suicidal and crashed everybody. However, some people are saying that major airline companies have found tend to blame the pilots on in situations where there are some technical issues to avoid accountability. This has previously happened with an Egyptian airline in the past a while ago. They're saying this may be the case here and warning to not jump to pre-existing conclusions. Now, what I don't understand is how, if they're claiming that this was a pilot error, but point at the same time to a technical issue, how could the pilots have actually salvaged the situation? And it seems to me that the whole group of things happened simultaneously. So suicidal pilots or erroneous judgments don't account for all those other things that went wrong. I think there's still a lot to uncover, and quite frankly, I don't really find the suicidal pilot situation plausible. The pilot was an adult man. His mother probably was fairly elderly. While an unfortunate tragedy, the loss of a parent does not generally lead to suicide. So I find that also very questionable.
Absolutely. What about the investigation at a larger scale? In terms of the technical aspect, and there were not just one agency but several agencies looking at the investigation. How much we will know whether there was this some technical problem purely from the, because they are also talking about that such issue has also cropped up in the past in terms of the fuel adjustment from from on to off, and in this app, in this case, it was something we knew. I am not an expert, I do not know, I'm just trying to understand it. And since you are a specialist watching all these things, how do you see that? Is it a lot of people, videos I saw on on the social media, people were talking about these guys are only talking about the pilot but not about Boeing and how they have been in question in the recent past.
So the reason people started talking about the pirates was because a fuel switch was turned off, and now the latest that just happened a few hours ago is a junior pilot asked the captain why the latter turned off those fuel switches. Now I don't know whether those fuel switches were in fact a dispositive factor in the crash. The experts seem to be indicating that it may have been, but they're not. But some experts ruled out mechanical fault altogether and claimed that the pilot's body raised the concerns over his actions. Um, so essentially, what happened was the pilot apparently switched the fuel controls to the cutoff position seconds after the Dreamliner lifted off the runway. And the pilots were experienced, so normally this is not something would do. Uh, it's not clear how they were flipped. There was a TV footage showing that a backup energy source, which is known as a REM air turbine, was deployed, which indicated a loss of power from the engines. So the junior pilot asked the senior one why he cut off the fuel, but the other pilot claimed that he did not actually do so. So what happened was, with fuel cut off, the plane started to lose power, and when it reached a certain height, it started to fall. The fuel switches for both engines were turned back to run, and the airplane automatically tried restarting the engines according to these findings, but it was too low and too slow to be able to recover in time. The plane clipped trees and a chimney and then crashed in a fireball into a building, killing not only the most of the people on the airplane, but also some people on the ground. And at the same time, the pilots claimed, that so far the investigation was not sufficient to really account for all the issues and for how it would have happened, and if the captain was not actually lying to the junior pilot and he did not turn off the fuel, then something else could have happened or had gone wrong, that would have led to this situation. Although it's not clear how they could have turned off without somebody else, without somebody touching them. I'm not an expert in that, and I cannot, I do not have a theory on that. And I'm not even sure whether that was the only issue that caused to crash. For instance, it's not clear why it was so slow that it couldn't quickly turn back up. Were there additional issues that prevented the power from being optimized? And also, if the pilot was so suicidal, why was he? Why did he turn the power back on? And how was he able to get away with it while there was another pilot there? None of that, really makes any sense at this moment. I think there's still a lot to be explained.
Absolutely, absolutely. Lots of questions and lots of answers that people would want to have. But then Only time will tell. With this, it's a wrap on this very special edition of The World According to Irina Tsukerman on the KAJ Masterclass Live. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.
Thank you so much. Always a pleasure.